Hey, everybody, this is Doug Edwards again, and I am so excited that today you're getting to listen to Kristen Lascola from North Coast Church out in California, and our interview together was one I really look forward to. It was so good that we had to split it up into two parts, so this is your part one, and when you get to the end of this part one, we're going to tell you a little bit about part two so that you'll look forward to that the next week. So without any further ado, here is Kristen Lascola and our interview. Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Hello, youth workers. Doug Edwards here with Youth Worker on Fire again. And I have my very special guest today, Kristen Lascola. And Kristen is from the West Coast. If you know me, and you do, I'm from Florida. We're down here on the East Coast. We're in the tropics. She is in California. Isn't that right?
I am in Southern California.
Tell me the city you're actually in.
Well, the closest major city to us is San Diego. So,
Oh my gosh, one of my favorite places. Okay, go ahead.
me too. Can't get enough. We're about, 30, 40 minutes outside of the city of San Diego, just in a suburb up north called Fallbrook. So we're considered North County, San Diego.
Kristen and I, by the way, have not met before. This is our first, well, we met a few hours ago, but except for email and that sort of thing. Kristen, give us a little bio on you. Just tell me your background. Where did you grow up? How did you get to, what are the events that led you to student ministry? Just give us a little bit of background so we know, so people know who you are and why you got where you are.
Yeah, sure. Like you said, we were talking about, I grew up in North County, San Diego, a place called Oceanside, and there's a large mega church there. People don't like that word, but it is what it is, and it's called North Coast Church. And I started going there when I was in 5th grade. Loved it. I think it was the first time I actually had fun at church and looked forward to going again.
Wow.
And kind of fast forward, I stayed in that area pretty much until my adult years, went to college locally there, and then got real plugged in right outside of high school. So they asked me to intern and volunteer for junior high, and I sort of fell in love with it. And then one thing led to another. I was a volunteer leading a small group, and then I was an intern, and then I was a director. And then they said, we're launching a new campus. Will you be the junior high pastor at one of our offsite new campuses in Fallbrook? And I said, oh my gosh, I don't know. Because I was like 21 years old and I just didn't, I was very nervous. But I took a couple months, prayed about it, talked to some mentors about it. And they said, you should definitely jump. And so I did. And I've been the middle school pastor at our Fallbrook campus since 2006. It's been a long time. So I've done all middle school ministry. I just love junior hires. They're my people. They're not everyone's cup of tea.
No, they're not. And I was trained in high school by Youth for Christ. And by the way, had no intentions of doing student ministry at all. Was on a music career path and was out there for a while. And then I would get to Youth for Christ. They taught us in high school, but were thrown into later middle school and were using college students, which I call middle schoolers who are older. But anyway, that's just me. And pretty much. That's right. So they fit in perfectly with middle school.
Yeah.
And so I love middle schoolers. I had to learn, and through a book, I can't even remember the name of the book now. It's my favorite go-to, and I told everybody about it. Tell me why you love middle schoolers. And are you still, now, you're the youth pastor for all of the levels now in student ministry, or are you still in middle?
So I'm still in middle. So I oversee our 4th and 5th grade ministry, and I lead our middle school ministry. And so I started kind of taking the other junior high pastors at our church under my wing in just terms of like, hey, let's work together and do this and make ourselves better. But I love middle schoolers because they are, well, I have a lot of energy and they have a lot of energy. So we're a good energy match. And, I think they're always up for a good time, which I am too. And, I love the ease of winning them over. I just think they come in ready for a relationship. They come in ready to be known and to be accepted. And there's a lot less of a winning over process. I just feel like they're quick to engage, which I really love. And because I feel like I'm kind of quick to engage. So there's just like similarities, I think. And, I love their affection. They're very affectionate and want relationships with adults for the most part. And man, they just do and say the funniest things. So they're not so young. Like I tried working with ages a little younger and I realized I'm far too sarcastic to work with children like tiny guys.
Yes.
But junior hires are right there to where it's like, well, you're not grown up and cool and you think adults are irrelevant, but you're not so young that you can't do things on your own. It's this perfect mix of like, you're independent enough to not need me all the time, but you're dependent enough to enjoy me at the right times. And so for me, they're just the perfect mix.
Well, they're in between concrete and abstract thinking. They're right there. And so the formation, here is something I'll throw out to you and you can confirm or deny whether or not it's true. And that is, I believe that many times what we dream of doing in middle school is what we probably ought to be doing the rest of our lives.
Interesting.
It is the most creative time in our lives. And I talk to our middle schoolers that way. I talk to our staff of middle schoolers. And I found that middle school staff, volunteers, never wanted to go to high school or below. They really were designed. You found that, haven't you?
Yeah.
They're designed for that group, and it's like they're drawn. And so that's I love you even more because of where your mindset is. I didn't know if you were middle school, high school, college, you're over that or what. But a junior high ministry book, and there is a revised edition of it too. Can't remember the guy's name, but he was so famous at the time. I still think it's one of the go-to books. But it was through Youth Specialty. He and his buddy Mike Yaconelli started Youth Specialties, which you probably have heard of because San Diego was like the spot,
Yeah, for sure.
And all of that. Now, let's stay on task for your sake. Number one, if I had your videos when I was doing student ministry, those 35 years full time, and especially when I was in the beginning, I probably would have not needed Youth Specialties half the time. I wouldn't have needed, Student Leadership University and Youth Pastor Summit, which are amazing places, both of those things. But you and your husband have done such an amazing job in putting games out there. Number one, I hated doing games. I had my volunteers do it. Give me some games. Let's do it right. Or I liked big things. And so, but you have a game episode that you put on.
Yeah.
Tell me about Dice and Roll. Roll the Dice.
Deadly Dice?
I think it's it. Tell me what, because I listened to it last night. Give us a little overview.
Yeah. So I'm right there with you in terms of, and that's how Jeff, my husband, and I designed the Ministry Coach podcast, because I'm like, what did I need? Kind of like you were saying when I was first starting out. And you need real practical things like youth pastors have to have games. We have to have, curriculum. We have to have leadership skills, all this stuff. So, as a young youth pastor, be like, oh my gosh, I need a game. And what am I going to do?
Games
and
are the hardest.
It has to be fun and you have to be creative. So, we do some game episodes, and this game we play called Deadly Dice. It's super fun. So kids get in, if you have a small group, you can all be in one group. We have a bigger group. So I have kids get in groups of like 5 to 6. There's one dice per group and one pen per group, but then everyone has their own individual piece of paper. You start with the dice and you roll it. If you roll a 6, you grab the pen from the middle and you start writing number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on your piece of paper. Meanwhile, the dice is still traveling around the circle and people are rolling. If anyone else rolls a 6, they're just going to snatch the pen out of your hand mid number and they're going to start writing on their paper and they're going to try to get as far as they can before someone snatches the pen from their hand, and so on and so forth until someone gets to 100. So when you get the pen back, you just pick up where you left off. You don't start all over. And it's super duper fun. It's like an easy game. All you have to have is some dice, pen, and paper, like very low supply, low prep. And I think that's what youth pastors need. Give me something that's not super complicated. I don't need a ton of supplies and I can kind of do last minute.
Yeah, that's right. Because even though we talk about prepare, and you have that on some of your videos, the big thing is we're not always going to be prepared. We're going to need that last minute game. You know, gee, we spent all week getting the message. How can we? Oh, no, it's a game. I forgot. So, listen, and guys, go on her YouTube, Ministry Coach, Coaching the Coachless, and look for the game part because that's all in visual. Mm-hmm. Saw it last night. That's why I wanted to bring that up because I saw that was a very engaging, when all of them can be hands-on, it's just amazing. What is a large group to you? You said you have a large group. What does that mean?
Well, when I first started, my very first day at our Fallbrook campus. So, I started at our main campus. So our main church is in Vista, and that's where I went to church. That's where I started working. That's where I interned. And so our junior high ministry there is like 300 students.
Right.
So then I go to Fallbrook, the first offsite campus we ever had. And day one, I have 11 kids. Mm-hmm. And so now, fast forward, we're a small town of North County, San Diego. We have about 100 kids. But I think that's one thing that's helped me, be able to resonate with youth pastors over the years is I have worked and understand a large ministry context. And I also understand a smaller ministry context. And I've worked for years in both. And then in a medium, because if 300 is big and 11 is small, maybe 100, and that context is right in the middle. And so, I can resonate with youth pastors all over the place, but yeah, right now, it's hard too, because, every youth pastor wants to be big, but sometimes I look back on those days of 11 kids and I'm like, there were some really, really sweet times there. And I got to do ministry differently than I get to do it today,
Yes. And there is some truth to that. I would venture to say that we all think we want big. We don't know what big is until we've been into it. And what I suggest for other youth workers is go to churches that you think are large, go see what they're doing, and see if that's really what you thought was what you wanted.
Right.
And then go to the larger, because you can always go down. The larger you go up to learn, you can always go down smaller. It's not a problem. But if you're smaller, building yourself up to the top without seeing what that looks like or to larger, top doesn't mean top, the larger, because sometimes you can get an amazing people growing into adults because of that smaller group ministry you had.
Yeah.
And some people would say, 300, are you crazy? I don't want to do that. That's insane. So that's what that is. That's your game thing. Go to their site to see that. Here's, I'm trying to stay on task because I learned a little bit about you. And so I heard the one where you talked about being on task and stuff. So we're trying to stay there. Okay. Yes.
I love it.
I went to my wife. I said, "Oh no, honey, she's between you and me. She's organized like you."
Gotta be. Oh man.
Oh really? Well,
the wheels would
tell
come
her that
off.
about me.
If I wasn't organized, the wheels would come off of everything.
Yeah. Well, and what I tell people who are not organized but creators like me, I said, I had about 35 volunteer staff to do 3 different ministries, and they were amazing people, and they were my organizers because they knew I was a mess.
Yeah.
But what God did was he brought me organized. If you're not organized like you better have people who are organized. And that's what happened to me.
Yep. I mean, God brings who we need to fill out our teams. And yeah, I'm organized, but I have a lot of other things I'm not good at. And you're right. God has like filled out that team of like bringing people that have all the gifts and talents that I don't, which is beautiful. It's just,
it is.
Yeah. That's why we need a team around us. You know, a lot of youth pastors don't have those teams and they have to do everything solo. And, but like you said, building up that volunteer team, even if you can't have paid staff, like there's volunteers that can round out your gift set very, very well. You know, you don't even need to hire anyone if they're in it.
I had some brilliant people that bailed me out for decades. I mean, some of them stayed with me 25 years.
Wow.
It was insane. Because and I know the average of volunteers 1 year.
Yeah.
That's about how long they stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason you're on here is because the average youth pastor, I think, is still somewhere around 18 months. It's like it's been that way since, Moses.
I know.
But anyway,
right?
why Moses lasted a little longer. But tell me about your longevity. Well, let's talk about women as youth pastors, because I heard you talk about that. Some people are uncomfortable around you because you're a woman. Most churches are men driven totally. You can back some of that up with scripture, but you can also back up. Deborah did a pretty good job. I just heard your devotional on Deborah, and Barack, is it Barack? I can't even pronounce his name.
Oh,
It's not Barack Obama. It's the other Barack, the one in Scripture. Right, there you go. Barrack. There you go. See, you're.
I mean, maybe they would have said it Barack. I don't know. The only reason I know that is because one of our pastors named his kid Barrack after that story. But then all the teachers call him Barack because of the president.
What were you thinking, Dad? Come on, right? So tell me about yourself as a woman, as a youth pastor. Tell me the things that are great about that and how you can encourage women. But let's just start with your story. We'll get to the other women, and how you deal with that, or how you've encountered that. Is that a fair question?
Yeah, of course. I think we're all a product of the church we were raised in when it comes to this, like that's usually our starting point. And when I was asked, I mentioned that I grew up attending North Coast Church and then working there later on. And I remember when they asked me to go from youth ministry director, because all I was over was female students. Our ministry was large, like I said.
Right.
So we would divide it into 7th grade girls, 7th grade boys, 8th grade girls, 8th grade boys. And there was a director over each one of those 4 ministries. And I was a girls director. And then they said, hey, we do need a youth pastor at this new offsite campus. Will you consider it? And I remember thinking, is that okay? Like, is that biblical? Like, I've kind of grown up, thinking for one reason or another that like women were not supposed to hold that title.
Mm-hmm.
And, I kind of tried to justify it to myself of like, well, is this okay because they're children and women can't like be over men? Is this like, but if they're offering me the job, they must feel like this is okay. And so I did wrestle with that a little bit in the beginning because it was just uncharted territory, like I didn't grow up seeing women in church leadership for the most part. I mean, not in like big leadership anyways. I mean, they would teach Sunday school or be in different capacities, but like to be the buck stops here person in charge of a ministry, the face of a ministry, I just had never seen that before. And our church really had never seen that before. Every single youth pastor at our church was a guy, and there was one woman and she was doing 6th grade ministry. But at the time, that was considered a children's ministry. And so it was like, okay, so there's no women doing students, and now I'm being asked to do this. And so I would say I wrestled with it a little bit and had to really go on this journey. And like I think most people do, of figuring out, well, what do I believe about this? And where did that belief come from? And is that belief founded in the right places? And is it the church I grew up in? Is it the pastor I grew up under? Or does the Bible really say this? And I had to get to the bottom of that, because if I had said yes to a position and now for the rest of my life I'm living in some high-handed like disobedience to God, like how is that a blessing to do ministry under the umbrella of sin? And of course, I didn't want to start out that way. And so I really had to take a look at it, read a lot of books, do a lot of research, and stop just cherry picking these verses out of context. And I think that's what I really learned as a woman in youth ministry, is like the Bible tells us a story. When you take certain passages just and pluck them out of their narrative and pluck them out of their context, they're very hard to reconcile with the rest of scripture, because it almost looks like it's in opposition. And so, you mentioned the story of Deborah, and that one just happens to be my favorite one. And my whole life I was taught that story wrong, because people would always say, oh, well, she was in charge because there were no men who were willing or available at the time. And after studying that passage backwards, forwards, upside down, that is not, I don't know where that idea comes from, especially considering the fact Deborah was married and there was an entire army. So, there were men and I think God always can use whoever he wants. We've never seen him wait for the qualified in any other instance. And that story just spoke to me so much, because all it said was Deborah was in charge at the time. And that's it. There's no other explanation needed. And so when you start to pair that with, some of the prophets and leaders and these women that kind of became invisible in the narrative of scripture, to me, this picture emerged of, oh, this is bigger than that one little pet verse, in 2 Timothy or something. So yeah, I feel like some things that have really helped me, The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight, How Not to Read the Bible by Dan Kimball, Gender Roles in the People of God by Alice Matthews. Those 3 books completely challenged my former theology on and then I had to come to the point of well, if I'm at peace with this, and if my church is at peace with this, and the parents and families coming are at peace with this, I don't have to convince the world. I just need to be where God wants me to be. And Deborah didn't lead the world. She led Israel, and that was her assignment. And that's what she did, which is pretty profound, even in that sense of Israel and that culture and stuff. But, I don't have to convince the world, but there are challenges. I think they were more pronounced when I was younger, because I was a lot more affected, I think, by opinions and, social structures of feeling left out or feeling overlooked or feeling very sidelined of hey, we want you here, but know the boundaries here. And I think it's made me a better leader overall, because I do have compassion and intentionality with everybody. I'm not afraid to engage in leadership and relationship with anybody, because of who they are, whether their age, gender, whatever. It's if I'm meant to include them in ministry, I'll include them in ministry. And so I feel like I've because of where I came from, I can see the need for it being super inclusive when it comes to our ministry teams and how we platform people and train people and give people opportunities and stuff like that. So, I think the church is coming a long way. I think we have some more work to be done. I'm thankful, that I've gotten my assignment and I love it. But I mean, I still run into that where people are very uncomfortable and they don't want to say the pastor word, or they want to push back pretty hard. And, I don't think it's my job to change anyone's mind or theology. I think that's a journey if you want to take it. And if you're curious enough to do some research and see, is what I've been taught about this, does it have legs to stand on,
Yes. Yeah. And my purpose for asking you that is not to try to prove yourself, but to say to other women, hey, here's how I dealt with it.
Exactly.
Here, and also to say to other men, here's how I dealt with it. And this is what I did.
Yeah.
Because we all struggle with some of those areas. Well, wait a minute, we're brought up this way. We're taught here. We're really not comfortable with what some of these ladies have done over here. But where does it fit in, and where is it okay, and why is it okay?
Yeah.
So you've answered some of those things, and if nothing else, you've given us books to go and look at that. Andy Stanley says, without women in my church, he said, we wouldn't probably exist. he said, whether you call them pastors, or not. I don't know if his wife's called a pastor, but there are other churches that the pastor's wife is also a pastor.
Well, and I think you just have to go, where does your theology match?
Right.
If you I would tell women, if you find yourself in a church where you will never reconcile the discrepancy in theology, then it's probably not the place for you. It's not your job to try to convince them otherwise.
Exactly.
But just go to a place that's a good theological match for you on that, because there's good churches that are all over the place. And there's a huge spectrum of what people call women, like you said, how people utilize women, what roles and platforms women can hold, the things they can and can't do. And so it's like, you're probably not going to change 100-year-old tradition of a church, but you have to find out, what do I believe about what the Bible says about this, and then find a church that matches that theology. But I think it's a topic that churches are increasingly having to answer. You do have to answer this question, I think, now more than ever. And so men need to research it just as much to know, what do they think? And especially in a position of leadership, what do you think? And what are the next steps for you in terms of what can women do?
Well, and it's really not a question of what women can do. There's so much that women are needed for. And the one thing that I found was that I'm not a girl, and I'm not, and I don't, and it took me a while to understand, oh my goodness, what am I trying to understand middle school girls, high school girls, college girls, when I don't even, my wife is still trying to get me to understand her. So anyway, what are you doing? And so, and I realized all along, early enough in student ministry, that I needed women to understand women. They probably understand men better than men understand themselves too. Because in middle school, once again, and this was the Enlightenment, this is where I'm so glad I didn't stay in the music realm, even though that God showed me later, okay, it's your hobby now. It was your job, now it's your hobby. You get to enjoy it. But student ministry is where I started understanding relationships better. And what I would say to middle school girls, and you can tell me if this is right, we would talk about certain things about relationships, and I would say, girls, you understand that, don't you? And they go, yes, They'd shake their heads. And I'd say, guys, you don't understand what we're even talking about, do you? And they go, huh? What? The answer is no. And I say that in an adult group 30 years later, and they'd say, huh? Right. So
yeah,
with men, we are very slow to get a lot of those things. So it really I don't have the answers to very many of those things at all, but that's why I'm asking you, because you were in the midst of it. And I heard some of those things you said about people feeling awkward, men feeling awkward that are on staff around you. What was the worst awkward moment you remember that you can say?
Oh my gosh. This wasn't at my church, but it was at a different church. I was speaking about something, and most of the room was very anti-women in pastoral leadership. And this guy just stands up and he says, "Kristen, thank you so much for making us all very uncomfortable." And I mean, it was a full audience, and I just felt like I was just ruining, it was like, you don't want me here, do you? This is just,
were you there to speak, or what were you there for?
I was. And
why did they invite you if they felt that way?
Well, yeah, I think it was probably a swing and a miss, you know what I mean, for trying to get people to be a little more open-minded about pastoral leadership. And, I said, well, I guess that's a mutual feeling then. Because as soon as he said that, I'm like, well, now I feel really uncomfortable. And I just couldn't get off that stage fast enough. I just did not want to be there anymore. I didn't feel, I didn't feel like they were happy by any means that I was there or doing anything having to do with leadership. And the pastor was great. He had my back, and he kind of redirected the crowd and all of that. He was very, very wonderful. But yeah, that audience member saying that, I just was like, all right, well, check please. Time to go.
Yeah, for
I'm
sure.
out.
Well,
So, yeah.
I'm sorry that happened, but thank you for sharing that, because those things do happen. And if you haven't been on a stage where, as another youth worker, where you didn't want to just leave, then you haven't been speaking anywhere. So
Right? Yep. We all have those moments. What have I gotten myself into?
That's right.
When is this going to be over?
and how can I not say yes to this next time?
Yes.
So tell me, I'm trying to go through some of these questions just to think. I mean, my normal thing was this, that is one area, and I want to get to you and Jeff and your children, because longevity is what I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not and you understand that being in a mega church, there is no mega church without longevity.
Yeah.
I mean, you can build something fast and it can fall apart fast, and there are people who have done that. I mean, I've been to Saddleback. I've been to Stanley's church. I've been to a lot of things in between, because the unusual thing about the church, which was a small church, I did not want to go into church. I was working in Youth for Christ, and I grew up with a pastor's kid, and his dad was amazing, led me to Jesus. I knew how pastors' kids were treated. And I'm going, I do not want to work. And I love the church, but I want to love it from a distance. I want to be in the church and not, and I spent most of my life in board meetings. So, as a youth pastor, and I hated it. But the biggest waste of time, I heard you say that.
Yeah.
As well, it is. And but anyway, going into that, what is your worst moment? I want your worst moment and your best moment. Then let's go on to a few other questions in ministry or in life. That just people seem to relate with our worst moments best. I don't know why.
I know. They really do. I think because, especially in this age where the social media, it makes us just think, oh, everyone's doing great except for me.
Yeah. Right.
In youth ministry, I'd say I have a lot of really bad moments. I think one time I left, I didn't even lock the doors, turn off the lights. I was crying so hard, gasping for air. Jeff thought someone had died because one of my volunteers was so angry at me. He flew off the handle. I had never been yelled at like that in my life. No. And I just left like, what am I doing wrong? Like, he's so upset with me. Like, he's so angry. I thought he was like, thought we were close. I thought he was a friend. And I just remember being like so hurt and having to kind of pick up the pieces from that and keep going. And, we reconciled and we're still friends to this day. He continued with the ministry, but it was just, moments like that for me stick out as like, or having a parent come in with like steam coming out of their ears and they're so upset at something that happened at youth group or that you said or that you didn't say or the way their kid was treated. And some parents are totally reasonable and, hey, can we talk through this? I'd love to meet with you. And some just come in with their gloves on and just rip you apart. And as a youth pastor, I feel like that's going to happen. Like at some point, a leader, a staff member, a parent, a student, someone will like rip you to shreds on something. And it's hard to pick those pieces up and not take it as like this total failure, like, but to keep on going after that. I think there's a lot of shame that youth pastors experience with low turnout. I've had events where I've prepared a whole thing and literally 2 girls showed up and it was like, yes. Okay, what are we even doing here? Like, this is such a failure. I've had students get really badly injured and have to call the paramedics and watch them leave in an ambulance. And you feel like, I'm so irresponsible. How did this happen on my watch? And, just things like that, like these big moments where you feel like I failed, because leadership is a heavy, heavy burden. And so when those things go wrong or people don't like what you did or people are upset with you or an event didn't go quite well, over the years, I look back at like, man, like that was hard, especially like youth pastors are typically young people. I mean, we hopefully stay in it till we're not young people anymore. But like when you're 22, 23 and you have some 45-year-old mom or dad screaming at you, like that takes a toll on a person. And it's hard to be in that level of leadership at such a young age and have to stand up against all of that. Because sometimes, we're just in over our heads on like students and what they're dealing with and what people expect of us. So I think that was hard. But, you mentioned the longevity piece. And I think, what I wish I had known about youth ministry before I started is like, there will be peaks, there will be valleys, and you ride both of them out. And you mentioned the 18-month thing still being a thing, that this turnover rate is so high. And I'm like, if people would not pull that ripcord, then they would stick around long enough to experience the fruit. And then you have that fruit to lean back on when you hit another valley, because you remember, oh, it was bad before, but then it got good. Yes. And then it got bad again, but then it got good. And so when you have that pattern to look back on, to like, I'm going to hit a dark season, but dark doesn't mean fail. Dark doesn't mean get out. Dark doesn't mean this is not working and you should leave. Dark means leadership is hard and you have to weather dark times and the mountaintop times. It's not going to be all mountaintops. You'll get a really hard class, or you'll have a hard group of parents, or you'll go through something personally. And because the things I mentioned, that's just ministry life. That's not even considering what was going on in your own personal life. Yes. Yeah. And so you just I think strong leadership weathers the storms. And that's where our maturity inevitably comes from, is we've seen it peak and we've seen it dip, but we know God is good through it all and we're going to be okay. Just hang on and continue to put one foot in front of the other, stay faithful to the call, don't panic, and know you're called to do this. Because that's why I'm in it as long as I am, because it's like, whether it's hard or easy, this is what I'm supposed to do. Like God didn't call me, hey, do ministry as long as it's easy and fits perfectly within your vision. But he's like, I'm going to hand you people, and people are messy and people are complicated. That's what ministry is, right? It's people, it's relationships. When was that ever neat and tidy and predictable? Never. So it's like, I mean, it's not going to be what you imagined, but if you stick with it, it'll be better than anything you could have imagined.
Yeah. The one thing I was told when I went to the church, and I went in very, my wife and I both went in kind of, it's kind of I don't know if this is the right word, but it's the word I've always used, called militant, because we went from Youth for Christ and to this church. It was just starting. They'd been together 2 years. And I said, no, I said, okay, I'm going to be faithful to God. I'm going to follow my trainer. Finally, who Andy McDaniel just retired at 70 from college ministry. He had developed programs for Youth for Christ all over the United States, major cities. Miami was a big one, Nashville, et cetera, on and on it goes. And so these guys, though, they would, I lost my train of thought because I'm old. I'm going to take a nap now. But anyway, oh, all right, just for a moment. But anyway, Andy was my church was going to follow him, and so this church call. I said no. I said, and then 2 weeks later, God kept haunting me, and so my senior pastor who was with me for 20 years, I went through a lot of senior pastors, and so he said, God doesn't haunt. I said, well, he did me. That's the way it happened. Okay. So I called.
That's the best word I can think of.
That's right. And so I called this church back, and I stayed there for 29 years. So
wow.
But anyway, right. And I didn't want to do church at all. But painful, yeah. It's just Youth for Christ kind of, the parachurch organizations are kind of like special forces. They beat you up. And if you survive that, then you can survive just about anything. And I didn't even realize I was working hard for 5 years in church ministry because Youth for Christ was so difficult and so good. And that's why I was going to stay. But so anyway, it is a difficult time. And I wrote a little book called Burn Up as opposed to Burning Out is what it's about. And very short book, but it was about those very basic things of, churches hire poorly and people choose poorly. And so a lot of that 18 months, I think, is just people making bad choices.
Right.
On both sides.
Right.
And even with you, I don't even know how much the great thing you had was you had a mega church that you saw large student ministry, you saw different things. You probably saw some of these guys taking some hits from parents and from volunteers and different things. So you might have had a little bit of that in the back of your mind. But when you're going in as young as you were, that was tough.
Oh, yeah.
That was tough. You holding on, the fact that you did that and held on after what you experienced. By the way, how did Jeff take it? When that volunteer chewed you out?
Yeah, I think he was super confused. Jeff is a pretty steady energy person. He doesn't get real riled up.
Very good.
Unless the Bengals lose or something like that,
Oh no.
But other than football, he's a pretty even-keeled person. And so, I think he was a little startled because I came in and he's like, oh my gosh, what happened? He literally, based on my response, he thought someone had died.
Yeah.
And, I think he's one of the best parts of my ministry because he gets it and he walks through all those things with me and he's fully invested and he just gives really sound advice and is very reasonable. I had asked our senior pastor once, what's the best decision you ever made in ministry? And he said, marrying my wife, because without her support and understanding what it is to be in ministry and be a pastor's wife and we always joke that Jeff is a pastor's wife because, that's how they always address people. Like,
Right.
hey, and you pastors' wives. And he always looks at me. He's like, I'm the wife. But I think, he just walked through that season with me really well and was just compassionate and, saw me through to the end. And that guy came back and he apologized. I think he even brought me flowers like the next time I saw him or something, because he felt bad for the way that we had interacted. But
did he go back on his pills for psychotic behavior? I'm joking,
it was a rough night.
And did you see it coming? Did you see it coming at all?
No,
that's
not at
the
all.
worst.
Had no idea.
Had the
no
worst.
idea.
And he thought, surely you know all of this, right?
I don't know. I think he had bottled it up to a point where, like you don't say anything and then one little thing triggers you and the lid blows off.
Yeah.
And I just was dumbfounded. I had no clue he felt the way he did or the things that I did that bothered him. I couldn't have seen it if you asked me to, and I've learned over the years, I don't know if you've done Myers-Briggs. I'm a thinker, not a feeler. And so if people feel a certain way, that's why now as a leader, I check in with my staff regularly. I say, I promise you, I won't pick it up. If you're mad at me about something, if you're upset, if I'm rubbing you the wrong way, I said, you're going to have to tell me because I will never in a million years piece together the one particular thing that's bothering you because what's bothering you isn't bothering her and what's bothering her isn't bothering him. So give me first crack at it. And I promise if you ever bring it to me, I'll address it. I'll work on it and I will not ignore you. I said, but don't ever assume I know what's bothering you because I just don't operate in that. I understand how people feel, but I make decisions much more based on facts rather than feelings. And so if someone's feeling something, I say, especially if they're a strong feeler, I'm like, you've got to tell me because I won't. I'll never know what it is. So I think that experience helped me to be the leader who wants a whole lot of communication. I always say, I'm not going to take it personal. Just tell me, is there anything, I usually phrase the question like this. Is there anything about my leadership that is making things difficult for you right now? And I don't say about me because feelers don't want to answer that because they think they're going to hurt your feelings. So I just say, is there anything about my leadership? So I try to remove it once from the person to see if that can motivate them to share a little bit. And I mean, they usually, I'm thankful to say they usually don't have a whole lot because I am so intentional with them. But I mean, don't you wish that I've often wished that my direct report would ask me that, because you might have something that you're like, oh man, but where's the context to just bring it up? Hey, by the way, you want to know why you bug me and why it's hard to work for you? No, nobody asked you.
Right. No, and they don't. No, on almost any end. Most of us don't want to. It's courageous of you to do that. And it's the right thing to do. It is absolutely the right thing to do. But most of us don't.
Yeah, we don't. Either we don't think of it or maybe we don't want to know. But sometimes I feel like that could have, like a year-long tension point could have been solved with one quick ask. I don't know. I don't ever want to be the leader that like they all know something I don't. You know how that leader walks in the room and everyone knows, oh, like don't say this or ooh, be careful. I don't ever want to be the leader where everyone knows.
They're afraid.
But I don't.
They're afraid to say certain things. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be my worst nightmare, to have them not feel like they can tell me and trust my responses to be humble and received well and all of that. That would be just a nightmare.
Well, and it is a personality thing. The Myers-Briggs things, I didn't use that for a long time. We ended up using something called DISC. I don't know if you remember DISC, which is a business thing. The DIS, the D was the dominant. The C was the organizer and everything else in between. And then we ended up with one of the guys that actually was a leader in teaching that for business people and became a professor. He's a hooty hoo. So, but anyway, it was great to have him on the team because we found out that God, once again, I'm not a great organizer. I'm a creator. And so he put all these organizational people, and we found about 15 years into that ministry that God had designed a disc for each ministry, middle school, high school, college, which we kept all separate and did our things with them separately, and which I believe in. And so even Walt Disney World taught the love languages, by the way, because I had a friend from our church who was one of the leaders of the Disney University.
Oh, cool.
And yes, and so I had all my volunteer staff go there, and he said, I have two professors who are Christians from these UCF, University of Central Florida, and Valencia College, which were both high-hitting colleges in the area, but they were also on his team, and they were Christians, and one of the courses that they taught for the staff at Disney as well was the love languages book and staff.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. I love those things. I love all the assessments.
Yeah, and I do too. I like that self-analyzation and able to look inside, go, why am I doing, why do I do? Because if we can't figure out why we do what we do, we can't necessarily help our volunteers or our students or our children. You have children, I have children. We needed all those things to help us maneuver the waters and do those things.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you got a whole bunch from Kristen in this interview. But for next week, you can look forward to part 2 of my interview with Kristen Lascola. And to give you a little bit of hint about not only the things that she is going to give you and value for student ministries in life, but we're going to start off with her and her husband Jeff's love story, because the Bible is full of love stories between husbands and wives, or people that became husbands and wives. And so love stories are very important in our ministry, because love stories and love does make the world go round. John 3:16 seems to say it best. All right, look forward to next week and part 2 with Kristen Lascola.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.